Yep.
But I want to start by simply asking how many of you, by show of hands, and you can use your little yellow hand that comes up or however, I'm just curious how many actually watched at least one game of the World Cup through the streaming service that was available. I just want to see. Okay. All
Pretty
right.
good.
Yeah, not bad. Not bad. All right.
Don't know how to
Um,
use the hand, but I did.
okay. Yeah, I saw people's regular hands go up too. Because yeah, sometimes the little hand on the screen is a little tough. Um, I was just curious because in the past,
I there, I don't have any sound.
I think Karen, you're there you go. Okay. Um, and so the opportunity to Kat and I actually had the opportunity, as you know, to go last year as well. So we saw the semifinals, and then we got to be there for the finals this year. And for those who don't know, and that's why I kind of wanted to ask, I wanted to give you a little bit of how it works before we jump into some of the highlights of being there. And so the way the whole process works, because this is going to be coming up again, and Kat's going to talk a little bit about where we hope this is going to be the next time. But the process will start actually again for the upcoming one next year, because they start with opportunities for the various teams around the world in different regions to qualify for the qualifiers. And then 12 teams are chosen for those qualifiers, which is the second year of process. So that was last year. So we had 6 teams playing in Thunder Bay, Canada, and 6 teams playing in Japan. And then out of those 12 teams, 6 teams, the top 3 from each, ended up in Thunder Bay this year. And so the opportunity to see all 6 of those teams, and the 6 teams obviously were Japan, the United States, Canada, Mexico, Venezuela, and Chinese Taipei. So it was opportunity to see some really wonderful baseball on the way. And I just wanted to talk about a few of the highlights for me, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kat. But one of the first things that struck me by the end of the tournament, and this was obvious from being able to sit there and watch 3 games. So it was 3 games a day. If you 11 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 7 o'clock. So we got to watch over 7 days. You can figure out how many games we got to watch. It was wonderful. But one of the fascinating things for me was the realization of just how incredibly wonderful a game baseball is. Because on paper, you see one thing, and on the field, anything can happen. And the realization as we watched each game for me was brought home by Chinese Taipei. An absolute, never seen them play in person before. But from game 1 to the end of their tournament play, they were an incredibly solid fielding team. They had strong pitching. And as it turned out, when you look at the final results from the tournament, out of the top 10 batters for the whole tournament, they had 5 of them. And yet they didn't win a game. And so it was a very fascinating thing it just was that reminder that baseball, anything can happen. And watching them play, they were incredible. So that was one of the fascinating things for me. I guess the other 2 big highlights were watching Venezuela play, and the joy and the fun that they had that reminded us that yes, they're playing for a championship, but they're also playing because they simply love the game. And it was very apparent with Venezuela in particular, because of the situation they found themselves in. It reminds us, sometimes how easy we have things in comparison to other places. The Venezuelan team had to forfeit their first game simply because, for flight reasons, visa reasons, the team didn't get there in time, and they only had 7 players. In the end, they ultimately only had 14 and 1 coach, whereas every other team had their full complement of 20 players and their 4 or 5 coaches. And yet Venezuela, with all the people missing, still played an incredible tournament. And one of the best pitchers in the tournament was one of the pitchers from Venezuela. And it was just fun to watch them. And as they adjusted to having to play different positions from what they were used to being able to do. And so for me, that was the reminder that yes, we're playing for a world championship, but they're also playing because they just absolutely love this game that we all love. And so those were a couple of things that immediately stuck out to me, but I'm going to turn it over to Kat and let her talk about the experience as well.
Yeah, and following up on the Venezuela team, it was their first game was against the US. So the US they had to, as Leslie said, they had to forfeit that game. And when we first got there, and we didn't know what was going on. And when we figured out what was happening, and then that sort of spread through the fans and the other teams, and people understood that they had a really difficult time getting there. There were issues with visas. It was just it was just crazy. And also the players were sort of sent with just very, very little money. And so taking us, as Leslie said, taking us to these different places in our heads, what baseball really means. And again, what baseball family really means. That baseball community made up of those other teams and the folks from Thunder Bay stepped up and took care of that team. And you wouldn't expect anything else, right? But you also, when you have those reminders, it's actually a pretty cool experience. We were able to watch some of the games. Leslie and I watched all of the games, but we watched the games that Venezuela played, and I can't even imagine what they look like or how much fun they will be to watch if their whole team is there and they have all their coaches, because they were amazing. And again, as was Chinese Taipei. Aside from that, one of the things, two things that stand out to me. One is the Japanese pitcher, Sato. She is now a player manager for Japan, and I was unsure if she was going to be pitching or not. To our delight, she did. And Leslie and I, the last night, we're sitting at a local watering hole having some dinner, and in walked the entire Japanese baseball team, and including Sato. And so we had met with some of the folks and knew a couple of them. And when we were finished, we walked over, introduced ourselves, and asked to be introduced to Sato. And we were, and I apologize for butchering her name. I apologize for that. But she was as remarkable a human being as she was on the baseball field. I believe she is likely one of the best female ball players I've ever personally seen play. And so that again brings it all the way down. How many times do we, as women, when we're talking about women's baseball, we get that fangirl moment? It doesn't happen as much with women's baseball because we're still creating that. We're still creating that atmosphere. And the Women's Baseball World Cup gives us that opportunity. And there's also just a simple matter of, it was fun. We sat there in that stadium when the US played Japan and beat Japan the first time, for the first time. And it was an incredible ball game. It was just an incredible ball game. And so, Leslie, is it okay if I talk a little bit about what we hope is going to happen, or do you want to?
I was just going to follow up real quick on the
Yeah.
Japan. So when the US beat Japan in that game, I mean, it was like being at the World Baseball Classic in terms of the atmosphere and everything. Because for those who don't know, this was the first time Japan had been beaten in 12 years, 39 straight games on the international scale. And then, of course, the immediate questions, the baseball questions that everybody thought about was, uh-oh, can the US beat them 2 games in a row? Did they beat them in the wrong game? And there was certainly, you know, and that's where it's just baseball, right? It didn't matter who was playing. Those are the baseball questions you ask. And then in the end, you know, the United States then played them for the gold medal game, and Japan did win that game. But the United States walked away with a silver in the Women's World Cup, but also walked away knowing they had beaten Japan and realizing that we are starting to see a little bit more of the growth of women's baseball and what we're seeing, with Mexico being there, and the incredible play that we got to see. I was also going to mention, probably, Kat, our favorite player of the whole tournament was the center fielder for the Canadian baseball team.
My
Her
gosh,
name was Senna
amazing.
Catterall. Her name was Senna Catterall, and
Yep.
it started with her play in the outfield.
Yeah.
Two of the most, if we were able to put, you know, how ESPN does the top 10 plays of the week kind of thing and things like the highlights, she had so many plays, but she had 2 in particular that I think everyone that was there was just like, wait,
Yep.
did we just see her cover almost the entire outfield and slide and make that catch? And then she did it again. But
Yeah.
on top of that, she also hit 500.
Yep.
She knocked in 10 runs for Canada, and she is one of the younger players on their team, as they can be 16 years old and up. And we're going to meet at 4:30 one of the 16-year-olds from the US from last year, Naomi Ryan. But Senna Catterall was the one that
She's
just sort of
incredible.
literally took our breath away.
Yeah, I'm not kidding you. There was that moment of absolute silence. And then, like, within 1 second, this uproar. I think everyone was stunned with those catches. Like, it just brought you, pulled you up short. And I'm telling you, I don't care what the team was. There was amazing baseball. I have said in 2018, at the World Cup in Florida, was the first time I had seen the Japanese women's team play. And I have said this many times since then. Watching them play baseball was like watching a ballet. It was truly amazing. It was beautiful. It was fantastic. Fast forward now several years, Japan still plays baseball like that, but it's growing, and the number of ball players that could make those kinds of catches, could hit 500. I mean, look at the USA team. I mean, Naomi, who we're going to hear from. I mean, and the list goes on and on. And so while Japan may be the gold standard, and yeah, I think they are,
right now.
There's a lot of people nipping at their heels, and that makes for really good competition. So if you get a chance to go to a Women's Baseball World Cup, or if you get a chance to stream it, please do, because it is the best of the best.
Yes, Catherine asked, so to your question, Catherine, unfortunately, not that I am aware of. She asked if there was a highlight reel anywhere that anybody had made. Because of the way it gets streamed, it just it doesn't work that way, sadly.
Who did the
we're hoping
streaming? Who did the streaming?
it's
MLB.
Who?
Oh, you mean the whole thing? That was WBSC.
right, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so they use a local company, they use a company to do that. Yeah. Oh, cool. She's playing so Senna Catterall is playing ice hockey for Clarkson University. Thank you. I did not know. Thanks, Gary. I didn't know that. But yeah, she was amazing.
That she also plays soccer and basketball and
as Zach points out, it was then streamed the gold medal game on MLB. And that was a surprise. As you all saw, they didn't announce it till the night before. And so some people, I had some of my students tell me they were flipping through channel to see what game was on MLB and were surprised to see a women's baseball game on the TV because they didn't know. We're hoping that that's a good sign for the future, that they will do more of that. And that there'll be the next time around, they'll hopefully play more games like that. They also played during the breaks between innings in a couple of the games, the trailer for the upcoming video documentary that you're going to hear about tonight from Gene Fruth. They did play the trailer, and again, talking about what Kat said about sort of silence in the stands as people watch that. And that connection that was made there as we also watched Jean out there on the field taking all her photographs and things.
It's everywhere.
Yes, but Kat, you want to talk about what we're hoping is going to happen next?
So, the International Women's Baseball Center, partnering with the city of Rockford, the Rockford Park District, the Rockford Area Convention Bureau, the Rockford University, all kinds of organizations in Rockford. Leslie and I were approached. I'm sorry, I'm saying all this backwards because this is another one of those times. I'm just really excited. So last year, many of you know that we hosted the USA Women's National Team at Bayer Field in Rockford as they were on their way up to play in Thunder Bay for the qualifying round. They got off the bus at Bayer for an open practice, and then the next day an exhibition game. And the estimates range anywhere from 13 to 1,500 people showed up in Rockford to watch them practice. Rockford turned out, it was an amazing experience. And word of that and the IWBC and the city of Rockford's efforts at Bayer Stadium got to the World Baseball Softball Confederation. And by the time Leslie and I got up to Thunder Bay, they had already heard about it. And we started talking to them about what Rockford can do, what IWBC can do with women's baseball. Leslie and I are working on a bid to bring the next the Women's Baseball World Cup to Rockford in 2026 for the qualifying and 2027 for the finals. We are working with all those groups that I have mentioned already from Rockford. We will hopefully have the bid in sometime in November, and we'll know for sure probably about the first of the year. So the Women's Baseball World Cup has been in the US one time. That was in 2018 in Florida. It has never been in the state of Illinois, and we are hoping that that will change in 2026. And if it does, we are going to call on all of you, our baseball family, to help get this done. This is very exciting. And I'm telling you, if we can bring out the crowd like we did just for a practice and an exhibition game, this is going to be one of the best attended World Cups in history. So we'll let you know, keep your eyes and ears open for what we find out. But this is exciting for us, and I think exciting for US women's baseball.
Yeah. And it's just, and somebody had said earlier, I think it was Kathy when she was talking about the fandom idea about getting people into the seats and getting the opportunity. This is going to be an opportunity for people to do that because Chicago is an easy place to get to, and Rockford is just straight down the road. General attendance numbers in Thunder Bay, so they varied, Catherine, depending on the day and the time of day. We estimated that the morning game, the 11 o'clock game, generally, not surprisingly, right, a little bit tougher to fill the stands in the middle of the day, work week, but unless Canada was playing, because that changed, but Canada played all the night games. Typically, probably 250 or so, we estimated in those morning games. Afternoon went up usually somewhere around the 400 mark. And then the evening games varied dramatically. They might be 600 to about 12 or 1300 when Canada was playing. And then when the US and Japan played, that was probably about 14 or 15. Came closest to matching what we had in Rockford in with the games last year, with the exhibition game and things like that. But overall, really enthusiastic crowd. As you can imagine, well, if you've never been to Thunder Bay, as Kat said, there's really no reason to go to Thunder Bay, and it's not an easy place to get to. So that was so the idea that
Yeah.
getting people there was tough. So a lot of it was local fans, and that's why the Canadian game. And then the US teams' families are hugely supportive, and they follow as a group
Okay.
Yeah.
that way. And so
Cool.
yes, the Olympics, Gary, probably had some impact on it, certainly, because that is what we were up against.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
You know, I think some of it too, I'm sorry, Leslie, I talking about attendance. I think some of it is that age-old story, and something that we've been talking about, right? Is just convincing people that women play baseball and that it's baseball that's worth watching. And so
Sure.
one of the things that we intend to do as we embark on this is to educate, talk about women's baseball, talk about what it is. Rockford, of course, is what, hour and a half from Chicago. You can get to any place in the world from Chicago, and vice versa. And that is certainly not the case with Thunder Bay, as Leslie and I found out. I don't even want to go into where they sent me as I was trying to get home, but the point is, I think there's a way we can use this, gain recognition for women's baseball, and also recognition for our USA national team, which is phenomenal, and that program, but also to educate people, to let them know this even exists. And I think we can do that. I think we have an opportunity to do something really cool in Rockford.
Yeah, so I'm seeing lots of comments in the chat. Dennis, to your comment about Madison, the thing that you have to that would be important to know is the games will not actually be played at Bayer Field because, as you point out, but what Rockford does have is the Rockford Rivets, and that would be the stadium we're using. The Rivets actually play in the same exact league that Thunder Bay plays in, and so the idea that we will have a the stadium is similar in all its necessities, though it is much newer because the Thunder Bay Stadium was built in the 1940s and Rockford Stadium was 2006. And so that will be where the primary games are played. Rockford Bayer Stadium ideally will be used for opening ceremonies, for some practice opportunities, maybe some lead up friendship games, those kinds of things. But what Bayer Stadium, and for those who've never been there, doesn't have is the necessity for the infrastructure that is needed. And yes, Madison does have a bigger stadium, Dennis, that is correct. But Rockford is where the IWBC is located. And so wanting to, and really, really, really wanting to connect this whole thing to the history of the game. There's the Bayer Stadium and the history of the Peaches and Rockford's baseball history, just in general, that dates back to the Forest Cities in the 19th century, right? Is hugely important to our bid.
I will say, to that point, even some of the WBSC officials said to me, gosh, can you imagine the Japanese women's team taking the field at Bayer Stadium where the Peaches played? They get it, right? They get it that it's not just about here's this stadium where you're going to play the game, but it's about that connection to that history. And so that's a big part of what we're selling, right? And so it's pretty darn exciting, I'll tell you.
Yeah, and all these other places that are being mentioned that you said this place could host or that place could host. all it takes is somebody, I mean, all it takes, but people have to put in a bid.
Yep.
And then raise the money, of course, to make it happen. So, but
Which, by the way, is immense.
I'll throw in too that using the newer stadium in Rockford means that it is better equipped to handle streaming broadcasts. So from a broadcast perspective, something like that would be better than using an older, smaller stadium. So all right, I'm gonna put in a call for questions in the chat. And while we wait for anything else to crop up, I have a question about your travels. A little off baseball topic, but did you have any memorable meals in Thunder Bay? Either something that was served at the stadium or something that you just ate on your trip and you guys are laughing, which means there's a good story here.
Go ahead, Kat.
I will say that while in Thunder Bay, Leslie and I do a good job of hitting all the breweries. So the question maybe is more relevant would be, did you have any good beer? The food was kind of secondary. Leslie and I have a good time, and so we did indeed, and we actually did have one night that was an exceptional meal. It happened to be July 31st, which was my wedding anniversary. And for the last couple of years, I have spent that anniversary with Leslie, not my spouse. So Leslie very kindly took me out to dinner for my anniversary. So that's my story. Leslie, what's yours?
Well, and the night we went out for your anniversary was, we went to that brewery that had an attached, Mary's right, the concessions were not great. That's why we had to go out for food. We ended up at a place where pizza and a variety of other things like that but then the next night, to your question, Tracy, we went to a restaurant that the name escapes me at the moment. But it was seafood and steak and things like that. And because of where they are in Thunder Bay, it was incredible. And we had and there we had, shifting our theme just slightly, we had an incredible bottle of red wine as opposed to the breweries that we went to, because these things all go hand in hand, right? Baseball and these kinds of opportunities and visits are necessary. So
they are.
So when the games come to Rockford, I think some of the visitors might be surprised to find there's no ketchup to go with their hot dogs if you do it right. So get a little Chicago in there.
There's always mustard.
Right, but for those of us who like ketchup, you have to bring your own.
I'm seeing critique of the concessions in the chat. So it sounds like that was not a winning not a winning prospect. So yeah.
No, it was not. So just a heads up, our next speaker, and she hasn't popped on yet, but she will be shortly because I just talked to her a little bit. Wanted to just highlight a couple of other things from the, well, in case other people have questions. One of the premier players for the US team from both years, if you ever get a chance to see her play, her name pops up, is Alex Hugo. Alex Hugo was the MVP of, as some of you know from the trivia last night. Alex Hugo was the MVP of the tournament last year, and this year she led the way with 2 home runs, as were 9 home runs hit over the course of the tournament, and she was the only player with multiple home runs. Absolutely superb second baseman. Is the game schedule such that there are games every day? There's one day off. Yes, so the games typically start, they go from Sunday to Thursday or Friday, with one day as a day off in case there's rain or any kind of weather issues or things like that, and that they have to reschedule any of the games. I see Naomi is here. Awesome. And so they have one day off, and this year there were no weather issues, so they actually got to use that day off to relax and rest. And some of the couple of the teams used the day to go do something. Most of them, their coaches and things really didn't want to use. They wanted their teams to rest, relax, do some practice, that kind of thing. And so, because they're only here for 10 days, and that 10 days is what the WBSC sponsors in that respect. So,
Other questions?
we got time for probably one more if there are any other questions.
Leslie and I could do a brewery tour on that off day.
I guess I would just end by saying, I was at the World Cup in 2018 that was down in Florida, and so then this opportunity as well. The level of play of women's baseball is absolutely amazing. And momentarily, you're going to get to hear from one of those up and coming young players who is, and watching Naomi from last year to this year, the growth that saw in her play, and I think it's really, I would highly encourage everybody to take advantage of any opportunity to get out and see the women playing on the field.
Yes, yes.
Thanks, everybody.